Well, welcome everyone to another episode of a Curiously Good podcast. I'm your host, Noah J. Matthews, and today we're going to be bringing on publishing expert and author Brad Pauquette. Me and him are going to be sitting down and talking about what do men like in stories? Like, is it all gunfights and explosions, or maybe is it something a little deeper? Our sponsor today is Outlaw Blood by Noah J. Matthews. It's a gritty fantasy western full of flawed characters and intense action. So stick around to the end. We'll go into that in more detail. So let's dive into today's episode. This isn't your granddad's Christian fiction. It's time to find and celebrate the good stuff. The Kingdom writers who are breaking boundaries and eating stereotypes for breakfast. It's time to show the world what a new generation of Christian writers has to offer. It's time to show them something curiously good. There's curiously good Kingdom literature all around us. Some of it old, some of it being written as we speak. Welcome to a Kingdom-minded conversation for readers. Let's talk about the good, the bad, the holy, the profane. And let's have fun while we do it. All right, well, I'm seated here today with Brad Pauquette. He's back for another episode. Really excited to dive into today's topic. Real quick, Brad, for anybody out there who doesn't know, who are you?
Who is Brad Pauquette? That is the question.
Yes.
Is it not? Who am I as a person?
That's always a hard question to answer, I feel like.
But in function, I'm the director of the company. That's my full-time job. So I get to hang out with apprentices like Noah and the other apprentices here. And I teach writing craft. I teach about the publishing industry, and I lead them in spiritual development. So that's my day-to-day. And as a person, I'm married. I've got 7 kids. And that's people ask what I do for hobbies sometimes. And it's like, well, between starting a ministry and having 7 kids, like that's it. That's the number.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. As somebody from another family of 7, or maybe I think there's 8 of us now. Yeah. There's not much that you do outside of family and then work if you have a job.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. You were talking about the company and how you manage us wild apprentices. And it's funny because I'm the only guy so far who's ever come to the company. And that's sort of what we're talking about, is the differences between what makes a story. What are men, like me and you looking for in a story versus like what women are looking for in a story. And probably we can't address the women's side of it very much because we're not.
I think I can, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, before becoming the director of the company, I worked as a developmental editor for many, many years. And part of the skills that you develop as a developmental editor is the ability to empathize with an audience that you are not. And actually, a lot of people talk about beta readers, like writers want to use beta readers, like people that will read their book.
Right.
One of the reasons that beta readers aren't very effective is because most people, if you haven't practiced this skill, aren't very good at guessing how other people would react to a particular story or an element.
That's a good point.
But as a developmental editor, part of what I've trained myself to do is to be able to accurately empathize with a different audience and to make good speculation about how a story element will land with that audience, which is why you're right. You're the only guy, but which is why I can also help our female apprentices who are writing to like teenage girls,
right?
Which I most assuredly am not a teenage girl.
No, not. Yeah. I actually never had that question in my mind.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. So, but nonetheless, you're right. It has been really cool to have a guy here at the program, and guys and girls are different. Yes. I think we have to start with that premise today.
That's true. That is an important thing to set.
We shouldn't have to, I don't think, set that premise, but let's just throw it out there. Guys and girls are different. There's not anything wrong with that. It's not a more than, less than situation, but there are differences in ways that we tend to interact with stories, products, whatever. And that doesn't mean that everybody will follow our expectations.
Right.
Like there can be outliers who maybe behave like the other gender in the types of stories they like or whatever.
Right.
That's fine. We're not discounting that in any way, but there is still sort of an average position that's different for men and women.
Yes. And yeah, that's true. That is something that's sometimes hard for everybody to grasp. But I think that is an important point to make, that, yeah, the way that men's and women's brains are wired does seem to be a little bit different, which really comes out in storytelling and the kinds of stories that we like to consume. I think one of the stereotypes that comes with guys and the stories that we like is that they're just all about the action, explosions and gunfights and cool stuff, and that's it. But I think we both agree that it might be a little bit deeper than that.
It definitely is. And those stereotypes are the reason, that I was talking about, that beta readers are typically wrong. Because they're basing what they think based off of stereotypes about, teenage girls or adult men, rather than actually having spent time like exploring stories, getting feedback from people in those categories to kind of find that average position. And it's interesting. We were Allie Prince and we did a book called Lawless.
Yes.
Over a year ago now, I guess. But it's a really cool book. And it's a sci-fi dystopian future world where we took stories from the Book of Judges and developed them. And so the target audience was adult men. And we had one author that we were working with, and she's a female author. And we were encouraging her, like, your story needs more emotional depth to hit the audience. And she was objecting to that because she was like, I thought you said we were writing for guys. It's all about the action, is it not?
Right.
And actually, no, that's not correct at all. Like, men like emotional depth in their stories, as it turns out.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of exemplified by some of the popular media that we see. Like I remember I looked up it was probably like last week or something. I looked up what are the top 10 movies for men, like the most popular, the ones that like every guy has got to go and see.
Yeah.
And the list is like I think like Gladiator and The Godfather and Shawshank Redemption, Saving Private Ryan, all these stories that, while they do have lots of action and big stakes, also have really strong emotional cores.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's the difference between movies that stick around and those that don't.
Yes.
Like, why is The Godfather on all of those lists, but Scarface is not?
What even is
Scarface? Is another. It's like sometimes people confuse the two movies. They're both Al Pacino.
Okay.
They're both about the mob. I think Scarface is set in the 70s, but it doesn't have the emotional depth that The Godfather does.
Right.
And I'm probably going to offend some people with that statement. There's definitely some diehard Scarface fans out there, but nonetheless, we have two criminal, like, gangster movies, both starring Al Pacino. One sticks around and ends up on all those lists, and the other does not. And Scarface is full of action and violence. It has all the classic, like, crime, manly tropes that you would expect.
Right. Everything a guy would want.
Exactly. And I actually showed a friend The Godfather for the first time. He's my age, so he's in his 40s. And he was watching The Godfather for the first time, and he was like, this is boring. I thought I was getting, like, more Scarface. But this is a boring movie. But actually, it's because of the emotional depth, right?
Right. Which is interesting, because I think one thing about emotional depth is most stories, or maybe all stories, do need a level of emotional depth of, like you said, it's what separates the ones that stick around, that are memorable, versus those that are easily forgettable. I think that's something that in both stories that men like and stories that women like share, is they both like a genuinely good story. If it's well made, anybody can appreciate it. But if it relies too much on those stereotypes of just action for men or just like emotion for women, then they fall flat for either audience.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because, like, my wife enjoys watching Gladiator with me. It's probably not her favorite movie, but there's stuff there for her as well.
Yeah.
Right? But I like those parts too. It's not like, oh, this is a girl part and this is a guy part.
Right.
And sometimes we see that, like, in Far and Away. Was this? You've probably not seen it, but it's
I haven't.
Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, and he's like this Irish boxer, and she's this Irish aristocrat. They come to America, and it's like an odd couple kind of situation.
Right, okay.
They got to figure out how to make it together.
Yeah.
And so you have these really obvious, like, romantic plot lines that are for the ladies.
Right.
And then you have these like bare knuckle boxing scenes that are very obviously for the guys. And so like both camps are represented, and like men and women can enjoy the story together, but it's different from what better stories do,
Right.
where those pieces really come together well and form a complete story whole in a more comprehensive way.
Right. Where in the Far and Away example, what I'm hearing is that the story that they're telling is they're doing stuff that's directly for men and directly for women, kind of like trade off as they go through the story. Whereas like Gladiator, it is a story for men, but the emotional core is relatable enough and strong enough that plenty of women can also appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where it's like a difference between like trying to please everybody and knowing your one audience and just doing it so well that everybody's going to jump on board.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. That's a perfect way to put it. And we were talking ahead of time, like both men and women appreciate emotional depth.
Right.
But there are different things that they like emotionally.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean, again, that like we can't cross over. We can't try to appreciate what the other gender likes.
Right.
But there are differences. I want to know what you see in that, because you actually introduced that idea.
Yeah. It is an interesting concept. One of the things that I see is like, well, let's just take Gladiator because it's just such a perfect example, is in Gladiator, like, strong emotion is really centered around this idea of his family. Like the general, he's got his family, and that is all he wants. He just wants to be with his wife and his son, and through all this stuff. And like, that's his one thought. And I think that's something that's really, I don't know, integral to guys and other stories that I've seen that seem to be directed more toward men, is this idea of family and like the protector. Like, I don't know, for some reason, like men seem to really just gravitate towards stuff that's about, a father and son, or a father and wife, and or a father and daughter, like this family, this like, because I think most of us as men have these aspirations of becoming a dad, even if maybe secretly, maybe we don't tell everybody.
It's in there somewhere.
Yeah.
If you're a man, there's that impulse, no matter how hidden it is.
Right. To start a family and to, to start a family. It's something that's in us, even though maybe culturally it's not as widely accepted as it was before.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. Yeah. Men definitely relate emotionally to stories about responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think the bigger arc there, the bigger box is men tend to relate emotionally to task-oriented situations.
Yes.
So like men relate emotionally to characters who have to change as a person in order to do the hard thing.
Right.
And that's really important to us because it's relatable to us.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, we see our role as husband, father, protector, even if we're not those things yet. That's like innate to being a man.
Yeah.
We see that. And so we get that idea of like, I have to change to become the man that will do the thing. Right.
Right.
And I think that women tend to relate more to emotional relationships.
Yes.
Like to women, it's more important how characters resolve together, like how a man and a woman come together, or even two friends, how they resolve their differences and come together to become a found family or whatever it is.
Yeah. Whereas, like you said, men is often like those titles, like husband, father, etc. Those are all, in a sense, jobs. They're a thing that you have to do, and that the character change is not for its own sake, or like in a story that would be more appealing to women, like relationship resolving and like how this character relates to that and all that stuff. Whereas men, the character changes so that you can do the thing.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
You have to become the thing to do the thing.
Yeah.
Which is another thing that I've noticed when I was like researching for this episode is oftentimes stories for men have a stronger focus on things like so that manifests itself in like stories like, oh, I don't know, Pacific Rim, where there's like cool monsters and robots and like guns and stuff. Like guys kind of nerd out about that. We like things, but the other side of that is how things and jobs and tasks are all all kind of related, I feel like,
Yeah.
in becoming a man and like assuming responsibility and yeah, responsibility is a big thing.
And I think a part of that things like again, if we want to pull it back to like a guiding principle for story, is that I believe it's statistically accurate that men enjoy learning through story more than women do.
Okay, yeah.
So men like when we watch Gladiator, men like to learn about Roman culture. We want to see what the Colosseum looked like. Like all that stuff is really important to us, like the actual learning of it. Whereas women are more inclined to accept the story premise, the story environment as it is, and appreciate the spectacle of it.
Yeah.
So even in like a science fiction sense, like Pacific Rim, which doesn't have to be a gendered movie, although in that case it definitely is.
Yeah.
But the men are like we see the new gadget or whatever. We want to know how it works, right?
Yes.
And so like it sparks this curiosity in our mind, even if that's never answered or resolved.
Right.
Because we're like learning about this new world and we're figuring out how all these dynamics work and how the gadgets work and things like that. Whereas female audiences, many of whom enjoy science fiction, are more like enamored with like, oh, this is just cool. Like, I just want to be here in this place. I don't need to figure it out. But more on a romantic level, I can just appreciate how cool this place is and all this neat stuff. And I just want to absorb this where I am and live in it.
Right. Which I think manifests itself in readership a little bit, and sort of like the genres that men and women tend to gravitate toward. Like, men often gravitate more toward like historical fiction or science fiction, which are often, very learning based. Like in historical fiction, you want to learn about history. Like, I've not met very many men who say, "Oh, I hated history. That was my least favorite subject in school."
Sure. Well, and there is a big representation among women readers in historical fiction.
Yes.
But it's usually somewhat different.
Yes.
So like historical fiction that is geared towards men will typically focus on like the Roman Empire, the American Revolution, things
wars,
like that.
Usually.
Yeah, things where there are wars and there are big historical events. Like you can look at it and be like, something changed in history that's really important.
Right.
Whereas historical fiction that is geared towards women tends to be more set in what we would consider like the benign historical periods.
Right.
Like Victorian England. Right, where it's not, there's nothing big happening politically or historically, but it's just like, again, it's just like this culture, this pageantry, this spectacle that you get to like engage in.
Right.
Or like Francine Rivers writes a lot of biblical fiction, which is really cool, but it's usually not focused on like the big event, but it's going to just like follow a woman or follow a family that is kind of just hanging out in a particular historical period. And so there's a lot of cool details, a lot of really neat world building, but it's not based around the big thing that's happening.
Right. I think that comes back to something that seems to be in most men, is like this desire for significance. Like that whole thing about like historical fiction that's geared toward men is often about big events. Is like you want to feel like you're, as a man, part of something. You're changing history in some way. You're leaving a mark somehow. Which I don't know 100% like why God put that in us, but it seems to be really important to us.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I would wager that it's because God has big things for us to do.
Yeah.
The Bible says, and we're going to wade into some theology here, and we really don't have time to do it justice. But just briefly, the Bible speaks of women being saved through childbearing. Right. And my application for that is, I think that women often, I think there can be exceptions to this. I think that women can be apostles and pastors and things like that. But women are primarily in charge of guiding the family. Like, I have 7 kids. My wife's job, so to speak, is to make sure that they are growing up and stepping into their roles in the faith.
Right.
Like, she takes care of that at home so that I can go out and take the gospel out in the vocation, the calling that God has given me. So like she takes care of everything there so that I can take care of everything outside of the home. I can be the provider, the protector, and also take the gospel out where it needs to go.
Which is really cool, because it is sort of like you see that like task versus relationship sort of thing. Absolutely. But like the way that God set it up is still, they're both absolutely vital jobs. Like you need like the women and the kids and all of that, the the relationship building and the growing, and like, and then you need the man to do the job and spread the kingdom in that way.
Right. Like I couldn't do what I do if I didn't know that Melissa was at home and the kids were like growing up in the way they needed to grow up.
Right.
I would like my attention would need to be there first.
Right.
To make sure that my kids are growing up in the way of the Lord. But because I know that she is just like absolutely nailing that job and doing an awesome job of it, then it frees me up to be able, and it's not like I ignore my kids. Like she helps here, she helps with what I do. And also I'm really involved helping with what she does. But nonetheless, like we have a different leadership role in that.
Right. In the different sort of domains of that's really neat. I think that is a big part of it. It brings it back to like how one thing that's really important for men in stories is, again, family. And also I think I often see this, and I've seen this in my own book, like this sense of honor and purpose and like shame versus like, acceptance or power or whatever. Like there's a lot of like self-image stuff that I think that a lot that also men tend to relate to in stories, which I don't know if it's expected or whatever, or like how much women or stories that are more geared toward women relate to self-image, but I do think they often deal with them in slightly different ways.
Okay.
Like with my book, for example, Outlaw Blood, it's like this gritty Western that's all about this former outlaw coming to earn his name back. Almost all the guy reviewers really seem to connect with that journey of overcoming shame and becoming like, I don't know, a better person, a better man, rising to the occasion, and like, so that all the shame stuff and overcoming, even though this character has a really, really dark past. He's done some horrible things. Whereas in many of the reviews that were by women, they seem to really get caught up in his dark past and really struggle to connect with him as this brash guy who's like trying to overcome himself. They didn't find him very sympathetic.
Yeah, when in that specific example, I think there's like one line in there that really is hard for your women readers.
Yes.
And that's where you're giving a list of some of his past sins.
Yes.
And I don't know the exact line, but it's like he'd murdered, he'd stole, he'd raped.
Yeah.
And there's like, and it's just rape is one of like a list of things that is mentioned. And for a lot of female readers, it's just really hard to get past that, right?
Yes. And obviously, and like that's understandable, certainly.
Sure. So it's almost like it almost disqualifies the story, though.
Yeah.
Right? And we could have a good conversation about like if that's correct, like we could get into like, should there be unforgivable sins, right? Because it is his redemption arc. Like he's repented and he's trying to walk out repentance in a way.
Yes.
Right? And so like we have a more elaborate conversation about that. But brass tacks is that today, for a lot of female readers, whatever their theology may be, like you get to that and it's just
there's no coming back. It's one of those things which is interesting of like content versus triggers of like where I remember my brother encountered this in one of his stories that he read in like a critique group setting. It's like this sci-fi chosen one story, and then there's one scene where the main character's baby almost gets killed. Like there's a knife to its neck, stuff like that. And while he was reading this part out loud, it was like super emotional. One of the girls just walked out and didn't come back. Like she said, like it was just so triggering for her, even though the content in itself was not in any way graphic or it wasn't glorifying any kind of violence or anything. Just the specific thing like triggered, and they were unable to appreciate any of the rest of the story.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
The thing, we have to be authentic to the story, and if people are triggered, ultimately that's a them issue.
Yeah.
And really I think we don't teach enough that our goal is to be untriggerable. Like that's part of maturity.
Mm-hmm.
Is like not like I like it anymore than
Right.
anybody else. Like
Yeah.
if a baby's gonna, be hurt, like I don't like that at all.
Right.
But my goal is, especially as a minister, is to be like if somebody's wants counseling, right? And you're talking to them and they have a real story like that. Your goal is to be like, you can't be like, oh, I need to leave the room.
Right.
I can't handle this right now. So I'm going to get somebody else to do this because that's terrible. You got to be like, I mean, yeah, that's terrible. But like, what needs to happen now? Right.
Right. Because how can we effectively, minister the gospel to a broken world or media tell stories that are truthful and will have impact if we are triggered by things.
Right. And so it's a tension that we have to walk in, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying that you should, but you could have gone back and made the decision. Like, we'll just take that out of the list, right?
Mm-hmm. I considered it like twice.
And I considered making that recommendation, but I also felt like you had to be authentic to that story that you're telling.
Yeah.
And if some people don't like it or can't handle it, that's fine. And we love them. I have compassion for those people who encounter that and they're like, I just can't. I'm done. I'm out. Cool. This isn't the story for you. And and ultimately, as the author, as the editor, we just got to be okay with that. Like, no story is for everybody.
Exactly.
And perhaps this story is going to touch a man who doesn't have that trigger in a way that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And removing that might interrupt that purpose of the story.
Right. Because it might make the character less real. Because it's like, if you want to say that he's a bad guy, but like, is he really a bad guy? Mm-hmm. And when you lives his crimes and that's on it, then you're like, no, this is for real. He was bad, but now we are seeing him change. Because I wanted to really exemplify that radical change that can happen just through Jesus.
Well, what about a man who has committed a rape in his past and has served justice for that? Has gone to prison and paid what society deemed was due. And if we remove things like that, and what message are we giving him? That he is unredeemable? I mean, if he's paid his due, he's repented, he's come to Jesus. Mm-hmm. What message do we have for that guy? And so while it's definitely, there's, context and time and place that's important.
Right.
There are real people who have done terrible things and also need stories that they can relate to.
Yeah.
That help them to see that there is a real God who still loves them, still cares for them. And that thing they did was awful. Right. Absolutely despicable. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't alienate them from the love of God and his mercy.
Exactly. Because that's the whole thing about the gospel, and we want to show it in kingdom literature that we create, is that like God's in the business of redeeming despicable humans. Like that's the whole premise.
That's the gospel, right there. Yeah. And I want to change gears. I want to pull back to something you were talking about. You're talking about Pacific Rim, right?
Yeah.
So a few weeks ago here at the company, we watched Pacific Rim, and then we watched Battleship. Mm-hmm. And because they're both made at the same time, very similar premise, mm-hmm. They're both about like alien invaders and this sort of scrappy military force that has to stop them.
Yeah.
Very similar quality of special effects and mm-hmm. production and things like that. And so we watched Pacific Rim, and then we watched Battleship, and you can see remarkable differences in the storytelling.
Yeah.
And so Pacific Rim was very shallow.
Super shallow.
And it did all the things that guys should like, theoretically, if we buy into this stereotype.
Right.
Cool action, cool special effects.
Awesome monsters, awesome robots.
Right. A lot of one-liners, like a lot of really corny one-liners, mm-hmm. Given before they step into action or whatever.
Just a little bit of romance almost.
Yeah, but not anything that's going to like make a 12-year-old blush, right? Uh-huh. But then you have Battleship, which has a strong protagonist who goes through a transformation, has emotional depth, and goes through a transforming process to be able to step up and do the impossible thing.
Right.
Which Pacific Rim does not.
No.
So what are your thoughts after comparing those two stories? What can you learn from that about how men interact with stories?
Well, in Pacific Rim, you have the story is about this man, and spoiler alert, his brother dies, and he's apparently,
is it a spoiler if it happens in the first 5 minutes?
Maybe it's not a spoiler. But regardless, his brother dies, and that's supposed to be traumatic to him or something like that.
Yeah.
But throughout the whole story, we don't see him wrestling with that trauma. We don't even see him really rising to the occasion. Like the mentor character or whatever, like comes and finds him and is like, come on, we need you back. And he's like, well, okay. And that's basically his attitude for the entire film is, well, okay. You know? And there's just like, nobody even really asks him questions about what he thinks. He's just there, which I mean, in one sense is kind of, relatable, because oftentimes we go through our job and whatever, and we're just there. There's not really much going up there. Maybe that was their rationale for why they didn't give him any depth at all.
Well, he's got a really strong jaw and good muscles.
He does.
And so he doesn't need emotional depth at all, I guess.
Not at all.
Is how that works.
But in Battleship, which I feel is more effective, you have this main character who's kind of quirky, and he's he breaks all the rules. His big brother's on his case the whole time. And but he gets kind of roped into the military, and so he's just kind of along for the ride at the beginning as well. So sort of similar to Pacific Rim. But then his brother dies. This is a spoiler.
Yeah, because that's like halfway through.
Yeah, that was like halfway through.
Yeah.
I said it before I said spoiler, so sorry. But his brother dies, and that does have an effect on him, and it causes him, since his brother was kind of in charge, he actually has to decide whether he's just going to kind of like float through this, or whether he's going to man up, rise to the occasion, and do what needs to be done. And that's the thing that they do in Battleship that was not done in Pacific Rim. Is in Pacific Rim, he's just there. And so it's not very inspiring to any man who's watching it, because he doesn't man up. He doesn't take the responsibility. He doesn't become the thing to do the job. But in Battleship, he does. He becomes the guy who defeats the aliens and all the stuff like that. So I think that's where the difference in them lies.
Yeah, and it really proves the value, though, of having that internal depth, that interior depth of your protagonist. That as men, we want to see characters change. We want to see characters be put in impossible situations, have to change their attitude, their mind, who they are as a person, in order to be able to step into the impossible thing and be the hero. And that's the biggest stereotype that I see. Like, if we're just talking about reading, experiencing stories, is as men, we don't just want the action. And like, we'll watch it. It's a good popcorn movie, right? Like, it's fun to watch Pacific Rim or like whatever man with a gun action movie or whatever. Yeah. But we are actually here for more of that, more than that, rather. And like the stories that we're going to talk about, that we're going to like share with our friends, that we're going to remember 10 years later and want to watch again, or watch with our kids when they're old enough, are the stories that actually bring significant emotional depth, that help us to understand how a man can change and become something better. Right.
And which is a really good point, because like Battleship, we wouldn't even call it like super deep movie or whatever.
No.
But it has enough that when you watch it as a man, you relate to it. You relate to this idea of rising to the occasion and everything. What I think is really vital, to the way that men relate to stories is, what I think part of the reason why we like to see like action and explosions and high stakes and stuff like that is because as men, we want to see what's the worst that could possibly happen, to us or our family. And then what we want to see in a story, we want to see a man who can then rise to the occasion and overcome this great, evil or this challenge or whatever. And so when we watch a movie like that empowers us. Like, we see, hey, that guy could do it. He rose to the occasion, even though all this crazy stuff was happening. He rose and he was able to do it. I think that's the big thing that men want to see in stories.
Yeah, and I think we get pigeonholed into that stereotype, right? Like, we end up liking the stories we're supposed to like.
Yeah.
I went and saw Lilo and Stitch with my kids the other night.
Yeah.
And I was getting misty-eyed, right?
Yeah.
There's just a cuteness overload.
Yeah.
In that movie, I was getting misty-eyed several times, and just hoping nobody saw.
Right.
And I think, like, as male readers, as male film viewers, whatever,
Yeah.
like we can kind of lead the charge in that and just being more honest about what we like.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's okay to talk about how we emotionally experienced a story. That doesn't
Right.
make us any less as men to talk about
Exactly.
character change and character arc and the emotional values of a story, in addition to like how cool the explosions were or how cool the gun work was,
Right.
or whatever other elements that we're talking about.
Right. Which if we do be more vocal about these things of the different, like the way that we experience stories, how we as men relate and enjoy emotion in stories, that hopefully will get filmmakers and authors and people to recognize that and be able to make more stories that are unique and also yet geared toward us without having to fall into the stereotypes.
Yeah, absolutely. And get more stories like Outlaw Blood. We need more authors like you, Noah, who are willing to tell a character-driven, emotionally driven story that still has like some really cool action elements to it.
Well, I really appreciate that. And it's been so fun talking today. Like, this is just great. I wish we could go on forever. Like, honestly.
I bet we could, honestly.
We probably could. We know how to talk. But once again, Brad, it's been so great having you on here today. Can't wait to see what's next. Oh, but before we go, where can people find you? Keep track of the awesome stuff that you're doing. Because, I mean, you just released it was a workbook. That was like only a couple of days ago, I think.
Yeah. So there's, so many places, but bradpauquette.com, just my name, is really the best place to start.
Yeah.
And then, from there you find links to my social media. And of course you can jump over to the company at writers.company. And there's a ton of ways that you can connect with what we're doing here at the company, including being an apprentice.
Yes.
And like Noah said, he's the first male apprentice to come through the program. Don't let him be the last. You know? Of course, we love female apprentices to apply and come visit us, but love to see more men that want to write stories for men. Yeah. So, let's have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. But once again, it's been so fun and awesome having you on here today. And once again, I'm Noah J. Matthews. This is Brad Pauquette, and this is a Curiously Good podcast. Well, that was so great sitting down with Brad. Always love talking to him. He's super wise and just such a good friend. Today's sponsor is Outlaw Blood by Noah J. Matthews. This is the cover. It's probably gonna be backwards in this recording, but it's a gritty, prosy fantasy western that's basically, if you took True Grit and added magic to it, or if you took the Frank Herbert's Dune and added cowboys into it. It's this fantasy world full of sand magic and outlaws and bounty hunters and crazy creatures that they ride all around during the book. According to the back of the book, Clyde Goller is the last of his outlaw gang, or so he thinks. On the run from the law and the guilt that haunts him, Clyde sets out to redeem his sullied name. Turned loose with a posse of bounty hunters, Clyde cuts a deal to capture his former blood brother in the Yeller Gang. The lawmen want him alive for hanging, to satiate the town's lust for blood. And it goes on there for a little bit. But it's a story that I wrote really to show my own struggle with shame throughout my life. Shame is something that I've dealt with a lot for many years, and it's through partly coming to the company and Brad's mentorship and just pressing deeper into the Holy Spirit that I've been able to overcome these things to a big degree and really get free. And so this book is sort of reflective of that journey. Also, a little bit, I threw in there some of my processing grief over losing my grandfather, and also dive into addiction and what that means. So it's been a wild ride writing and publishing this book. You can get it off of Amazon. Just type right in Outlaw Blood. Should be the first thing that comes up. It's a bright red cover. Or you can check it out on noahjmatthews.com/outlawblood. Once again, I'm Noah J. Matthews, and this is a Curiously Good podcast. Catch you later. You made it this far, so make sure you're liking, subscribing, and commenting. For a weekly dose of curiously good literature, hop over to the Pearl at pearlmag.co and make sure you subscribe. Just by listening, you're contributing to Better Kingdom Media. To sponsor an episode, email us at advertise@pearlmag.co. We'll catch you later.